Senator Smith. Senator Singh.
Thank you. I rise to highlight the importance of our cities in Australia and the Shadow Minister for City, Anthony Albanese's statement that cities matter. What is more, the livability and quality of urban life in Australian cities, which has long been a policy focus of the Labor Party, will matter more and more in years to come. After this government abolished the previous Labor government's Major Cities Unit, Labor responded by establishing the Urban Policy Dialogue, adopting a national agenda for better cities and creating a cities portfolio to ensure that urban policy is accorded the highest priority. And we did this because Labor understands that Australian governments in the 21st century need to be focused on our people, making it easier for them to get around our cities so that more people can walk, cycle and use public transport. As Professor Jan Gehl, the renowned Danish architect and urban design consultant, puts it, first life, then spaces, then buildings. The other way around never works. Mr. Acting President, I recently had the pleasure of visiting Copenhagen, Denmark's capital and one of the world's most consistently livable and ever more sustainable cities. Danes are often said to be the happiest people in the world, and Copenhagen is often described as one of the world's most livable cities, alongside Melbourne, of course, due to their systematic improvement of conditions for city life and people traffic. And while I was in Copenhagen, I was fortunate enough to spend some time and share some ideas with Professor Gehl, whose career has focused on improving the quality of urban life by reorienting city design towards pedestrian and cyclists. He has transformed streetscapes in London, New York and Copenhagen to favour cyclists and pedestrians, and has conducted studies in several Australian cities, including in my hometown of Hobart. His unambiguously people-focused city design and transport planning has had a profound and growing impact on our Australian cities. Gehl has already worked on Melbourne, Melbourne Docklands, Perth, Adelaide, Sydney, Brisbane, Hobart and Launceston. And a key recommendation of his early report to the City of Melbourne in 1994 and updated in 2004 was to create opportunities for outdoor dining, mimicking the success of the grand boulevards of Paris and the communal squares of Rome. And while it was ridiculed at the time, Melbourne now has the highest ratio of street furniture per person in the world. Outdoor cafes have increased from less than 50 in 1990 to over 600 today. The number of pedestrians in the city on weekdays and evenings has doubled, and Swanston Street has more pedestrians per day than Regent Street in London. The Professor and I talked about implementation of the recommendations in the Gehl's seminal report in 2010 for the Hobart City Council on Hobart's livability and his thinking behind it. And as Professor Gehl pointed out, and all who live there and would understand, nature has blessed Hobart with a unique setting: hills, nature reserves and the sea close to the city. Hobart has also benefited from a slower growth rate than other Australian capitals, meaning that much of the character of the city and its historic buildings have been protected. But as all citizens in Hobart would know, our highway-style city streets are a serious barrier between the city and the harbour. No parked cars in the world, Professor Gehl believes, have a better view than the hundreds of cars parked along Hobart's waterfront. Each one of Gehl's report's 230 recommendations has been considered by the Hobart Council and condensed into an action plan, which is being implemented stage by stage and is already making an appreciable difference to Hobart's livability. Because of Hobart's strong base fabric, Professor Gehl believes the process should be easier than in many other cities, yet visionary leadership, as seen in many other fine cities in the world, will still very much be needed. And visionary leadership of Hobart's transport system was also called for recently by internationally renowned sustainability professor Peter Newman at the Hobart Town Hall last Friday night. Professor Newman from WA's Curtin University presented a public lecture titled "Will Hobart Ever Do Light Rail? A Global Context?" to present the case and lay down a challenge to all levels of government to deliver on this project, a project by which I support. Professor Newman has identified that the 21st century knowledge economy needs spatial efficiency. Public transport, cycling and walking are spatially efficient. Freeways, traffic jams and urban sprawl are not. And this is well understood by the Danes, where, as Professor Gell has noted, after many years of pruning back pedestrians' areas, and I quote, "Copenhagen was one of the first cities in Europe to grasp the nettle in the early 1960s and begin reducing car traffic and parking in the city centre in order to create once again better space for city life." The iconic example of this process is this conversion of Strøget, Copenhagen's traditional main street, in a pedestrian promenade in 1962. I had the opportunity to walk down Strøget. It is an area now that only has people, it doesn't have cars, it doesn't have traffic congestion. Following that decision, the area in the city devoted to pedestrians and city life grew by a factor of 7, from 15,000 square metres in 1962 to over 100,000 square metres by 2005. Jan Gell's book, Cities for People, the most recent book he has written, has become the key text for city planners across the world, having been printed in 20 languages since 2010. Its focus on putting people first in transport planning enables bike lanes and pedestrian thoroughfares and great mass transit and abundant public spaces to naturally follow. Networks of good bicycle paths that provide safe alternative transport systems. You simply want to get on a bike in Copenhagen. I enjoyed being on a bike, and in fact it was the quickest way to get around because that's just what people did. Copenhagen is now building 26 suburban commuter arteries just for bicycles, carefully maintained bike paths linking suburbs with the inner city, up to 20 kilometres long and requiring the cooperation of 21 separate municipal governments. This makes sense because in a city much colder than any city in Australia, including Hobart, 37% of Copenhagen's residents and 55% of downtown dwellers use bikes as their primary mode of transportation. In fact, only 29% of Copenhagen households actually own a car. Copenhagen is the world's cycle infrastructure leader and its most livable city because it prioritises people and bikes over cars. And with that, of course, comes a distinct bicycle culture that gives such vibrancy to the city. In fact, Copenhagen was the European Green Capital in 2014, and that ambitious green profile of the city has a clear goal: become the world's first CO2 neutral capital by 2025. The Danish government has decided to lead the world's transition to a green growth economy and will be independent of fossil fuels by 2050. While in Copenhagen, I cycled to the offices of the official green brand for the country, State of Green, a public-private partnership that gathers all the leading Danish players in the fields of energy, climate, water and the environment. It was clear from my discussions with State of Green employees and with Professor Gell that to improve the livability and the sustainability of Australian cities, to aspire to make Sydney or Hobart as livable as Copenhagen and Melbourne, Australian governments need to follow federal Labor's lead to ensure that they are energetic, diverse and vibrant places, rich in human experiences, with a more thoughtful approach to how we create and manage and get around the spaces in between. Of course, there may be other policy ideas that need to complement that, like London introduced, for example, a congestion charge for cars driving into the city. But what is clear is that we need to support cities for people first. People are the key.